Tuesday on Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope everyone's having a great day out there today. Really good show coming up here. Jon Marthaler, who's been doing a lot of soccer coverage for the Star Tribune this year, joins me here in just a little bit to talk Minnesota United. The Loons been off for a few weeks, kind of a self-imposed break. They went out early in the Leagues Cup. That is kind of part of this mid-season tournament in Major League Soccer. Now they are back on Saturday, 9 games left in the Major League Soccer season. They are in 9th place in the Western Conference, right on the tip of the playoff race, right there at the very end of it. Would be in kind of that play-in 8-9 game, that wild card game, if the playoffs started today, but of course they don't. And they've got a bunch of new players they added during this most recent transfer window to try to get into the mix during the last part of this season. So they resume play Saturday. John and I will talk about that, as well as Minnesota Aurora, who made news this week. They are not seeking to be part of the Women's Professional League in 2026, not seeking an expansion franchise, not saying it's never going to happen, but it is not going to happen as part of that 2026 expansion. John and I will talk about that in just a little bit. Have a college football thought at the end of the show, a Twins thought in just a few minutes. First, though, what did I miss? I don't know Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores all that well, but in listening to him, watching him in the last year and a half or so since he was hired as the Vikings defensive coordinator, I have gotten the sense that he does not necessarily love the spotlight. He loves to coach football, particularly the defense, but I do not get the sense that he is someone who loves being up on the podium, being in front of the cameras, and doing all of that. That being said, I imagine he did not particularly enjoy Monday when he was, for better or worse, the center of attention on multiple fronts for his coaching. Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback for the Dolphins, where Brian Flores was previously the head coach, had some things to say about his relationship with Flores in an interview on the Dan Le Batard show. Here is what Tua said when he was asked about his relationship with current head coach Mike McDaniel compared to the relationship he had with Brian Flores. He said, to put it in simplest terms, if you woke up every morning and I told you that you suck at what you did, that you didn't belong doing what you did, that you shouldn't be here, that this guy should be here, that you haven't earned this right, and then you have someone else come in and tell you, dude, you are the best fit for this, how would it make you feel listening to one or the other? You see what I'm saying? You hear it, no matter what it is, the good or the bad, you hear it more and more, you start to believe it. I don't care who you are. You could be president of the United States. You have a terrible person telling you things that you don't want to hear or probably shouldn't be hearing. You're going to start believing that about yourself. And so that's what sort of ended up happening. It's basically been, 2 years of training, that out of not just me, but a couple of guys as well that have been here my rookie year all the way until now. Interesting. Tua was a rookie in 2020. Got pulled a couple times, benched. Ryan Fitzpatrick came in for the Dolphins. Flores, of course, was the head coach of the Dolphins back then, and things didn't work out. Ultimately, Flores ends up suing the league, suing a bunch of teams from the league, again, not because he wants the spotlight, obviously, but because he feels justified in his position. But that is another case where the spotlight found him. So there's this strained relationship that Tua has not talked about a whole lot in the past, but now is kind of coming to light, or is at least being brought back up, a couple of years later. And Tua certainly has played better under Mike McDaniel, obviously an offensive-minded head coach. Tua has developed. These were his third and fourth years in the league under McDaniel versus, first and second in the Flores regime. So there's probably some natural growth there as well. But the comments were strong enough that Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell got asked about it on Monday. Here was what O'Connell had to say about what Tua had to say about Brian Flores.
Yeah, I don't particularly have a comment on something that took place with another team or I don't like to comment on, comments of other players on other teams. But I can just tell you, I know the players Flo works with. He's got great relationships here. He really has. I know you guys have heard a lot of them talk about how much they enjoy playing for him and how much I enjoy working with him every day. And that's all I can really comment on. And I just like to leave it at that.
I like that answer from KOC, and it does track with everything we've heard from players about Brian Flores in his time with the Vikings, including, for better or for worse, here's the better part, Stephon Gilmore, who played for Flores when Flores was running the defense in New England, had some of his best years there under Flores when Flores was, of course, running the defense, like I said. Gilmore signs with the Vikings over the weekend. His first practice was on Monday. And of course, he gets asked naturally about, why he wants to be here. And of course, part of that is, the Vikings wanted him. They have a vacancy. He's a veteran looking for a deal. But part of it is surely the familiarity he has with Flores, with the system, with the defense, and wanting to play for that coach again. Here was Gilmore just a little bit when asked about the nature of playing in a Flores defense.
Just that, he's aggressive. He's offense is really scared to go against his defenses. So I know the disguise is pretty good. Always had a good defense no matter where he went, and I'm just trying to be part of that.
Gilmore, by the way, should help the Vikings tremendously. Assuming he is healthy, he gives them one more veteran, and not just a body, of course, a guy who's been multiple times Pro Bowl, All-Pro, the pedigree he has. Same draft class as Harrison Smith. So, A, he's been around for a while, but B, thinking about adding a Harrison Smith type to the cornerback group to go with that safety group. That just gives them more experience, more talent, more depth. Really gives me more confidence in their defense, which I think is going to have to be the better side of the ball this year, and frankly was the better side of the ball most of last year as well until they ran out of depth. So I think Flores has done a great job here coaching up the defense so far, and now he's got more talent. Was surprised that Tua went there with this. He's certainly free to speak his mind. This would probably normally be kind of those one-day stories that got a lot of ESPN headlines. However, Brian Flores, according to the Vikings media schedule, slated to talk to reporters today. I can't imagine he will go through that whole session without getting asked about this. I don't think he'll probably say a whole lot, kind of take the same approach as Kevin O'Connell, but interesting little subplot here. Vikings don't play the Dolphins this year, so there's not going to be any kind of lingering stuff there, but an interesting kind of dynamic there, especially as we consider the careers of Flores and Tua going forward. Twins lost 5-3 to the Padres. Not a shocking result. The Padres have been very good, especially lately. Twins 2 in a row lost now after winning the first 3 games of this road trip in Texas. So win one of these last 2 against San Diego, and you'll feel pretty good about a road trip. Even if they got swept by the Padres, it wouldn't be a disaster of a road trip. But this one felt like one that got away, especially because it was uncharacteristic of rookie starting pitcher Zebby Matthews. Comes into this game with a reputation for impeccable control, has a hit batter in the first inning that leads to a couple of runs for the Padres in that inning, walks 2 batters in the third inning. Both of those guys come around to score. The bigger blow, though, wasn't the balls that he threw. It was one strike that Zebby Matthews threw. 0-2 pitch to Jackson Merrill. In the third inning, bases loaded, couple guys out. All of a sudden, that ball goes to the wall, leaves a changeup up, clears the bases with a double. Twins, down 5-2 at that point. They get 1 in the 9th, but end up losing 5-3. Interesting. I saw on social media a few different people said, "Hey, seems like the Twins give up a lot of 0-2 hits. It just maybe those are more memorable. I don't know." So I had to look it up. I was curious. Do they give up relative to the rest of the league a lot of hits on 0-2? Turns out they don't. League average balls, on at bats that finish from an 0-2 count. League average is 151 batting average. Obviously not very good. There's going to be a lot of strikeouts there. You're in the hole. You don't have much going on. League OPS in that situation, 384. Twins pitchers allowing hitters just to hit 129, 22 points below league average, and slugging around the same as league average, OPS below league average. So Twins don't generally find themselves in danger on an 0-2 pitch. It's maybe just those are memorable, right? When you give up a hit on an 0-2 pitch, especially a bases loaded double, that is going to be pretty memorable. So not so much just the balls that Zebby Matthews uncharacteristically threw. It was being wild within the strike zone, getting a changeup up on an 0-2 pitch. That ends up sealing his fate in the game. Only gives up 2 earned runs in 5 innings because an error by Zebby Matthews in that inning contributed to the mess as well. But not the crispest game from the Twins, not the kind of game that they're going to want to play going forward. But again, a reminder, they are leaning very heavily on these young pitchers. You're going to see David Festa, Simeon Woods-Richardson, still a lot in this rotation. They've held up pretty well so far, but that is, again, like I talked about with Royce on Monday, a lot of pressure to put on these guys. We will see how they hold up over the course of the next several weeks.
Let's talk soccer today with Jon Marthaler. Been covering a lot of Minnesota United soccer for the Star Tribune this year. Interesting time for the Loons, John. They haven't played for a little while. Kind of a self-imposed break because they didn't advance in the Leagues Cup, but kind of gives everybody a chance to sort themselves out. They did a lot in this, recent transfer window that just closed, and I guess now we get to see some of these players in action once they resume play Saturday at Allianz Field.
Yeah, it's sort of funny how it worked out in the sense that they got knocked out of the Leagues Cup before the knockout round. So their last game was July 30th. Their next game is Saturday, which is August 24th.
Yeah.
And in between was the business end of the summer transfer window. So they've acquired 4 new players, none of whom have played for the team before.
Right.
They had a 5th signing who had already played because he got signed at the start of June, and they have a 6th guy they just traded for that's, a little bit better known to MLS fans. So it's like a whole new team for the 9 games remaining in the fall season. It's almost like the old days of the NASL when they had a spring season and a fall season.
Yeah.
The spring season they finished 9th, and now they got a 9-game fall season to try to make the playoffs and, to debut the New York Cosmos. That joke's for people who've been around for 10 years. Thanks a lot.
Pele?
Thanks a lot.
Where's Pele?
Where's Pele?
I wonder if I just wonder how this is all going to look, because they got rid of a bunch of guys too, right? Like they sent guys out on loan, they traded, got rid of essentially. This is a remaking, and this was always kind of the plan, right?
Yeah, they had a very quiet winter because the GM Khalid El-Ahmad,
because nobody was here.
He came in a little late and was still working in his old job. They didn't have a coach till the 4th game of the season. So last year's offseason was pretty quiet. They re-signed Will Trapp, and they brought in a couple of guys who are sort of fringe guys. And there was a number of sort of movements around the fringe this summer in terms of sending guys out on loan. They loaned out Morris Duggan, they loaned out Patrick Weah, and they traded Caden Clark, who's one of us, Medina native. Yeah, they've had him for half a season, and I guess decided they didn't like the look of him, or he didn't want to play wingback as much as they wanted him to play wingback or something. So they sent him out to Montreal. So they've gotten rid of a couple of guys. They had already transferred Kervin Arriaga and, of course, Emmanuel Reynoso earlier this season. So they had done a lot of their outflow already.
Right.
And now was a lot of the replacement. They brought in, they've had four new signings, a forward, Kelvin Yeboah, who was technically playing for Genoa in Italy, but had been loaned out. He's played in Austria, Germany, France, Belgium, and Italy over the past few years. So he's he's got like all of Europe covered. He's like a risk board in player form.
The Allies or the Axis? Yeah, I don't know.
he's on both sides of that one, I think. Okay. They brought in a guy who I think is going to probably be a right wing back, be competing for sort of the right wing back spot, Matusz Kamech. I'm not
Okay.
totally. I'm still working on my pronunciation.
Yeah.
I'm still. There's a lot of new pronunciations that I'm still working on a little bit.
Okay.
He's going to be sort of a right wing. He comes from Slovakia. He was almost on Slovakia's national team for the European Championships this summer. He was one of the final cuts for that. He's a younger guy, 23. So he's not coming with a huge pedigree, but in the sense that he was already in the national team picture for, a team that's in the European Championships, that's something to sort of hang your hat on there. They brought in Jefferson Diaz, who's a center back from Colombia, Colombia is obviously not a top level league in the sense that maybe Argentina or Brazil, when we look at South American leagues, where you would really be confident. But he's again a young guy who fits in pretty well in terms of filling in for Kervin Arriaga at sort of that right center back position. And then right on the final day of the transfer window, they signed a guy named Joaquin Pereira, who is not exactly a attacking midfielder, but sort of in that attacking midfielder role. When you talk about guys who are Argentinian as Pereira and are attacking midfielders, you immediately start to think of an Emmanuel Reynoso type player that is an amazing passer, an amazing offensive player, doesn't run at all, doesn't play any defense whatsoever. And that, what we've been told, is that is not the kind of player Pereira is. He's a little more accomplished, a little more versatile in the sense that he can play on the left. He can play sort of as an attacking midfielder, maybe what in soccer we'd call a number 8, which is a guy who's going to play defensively and offensively in midfield. So we'll see where he slots in. But honestly, I think of all the guys they signed, he might be the most intriguing one to me in terms of what he can bring to Minnesota's attack. They've sort of been chopping and changing a little bit with the midfield. So if they had somebody who was going to provide that offensive lift, I think that could be really interesting. He's a designated player. Yeboah is also a designated player. So that sort of gives you some indication that Minnesota could have sort of tried to back off and take out, well, we're going to rebuild over a number of years kind of thing. Right. We're going to sign some guys who are under 22. We're going to try to build for the future. And instead they brought in 2 new designated players, and they're really sort of adding to what they have. So in that sense, it's a little bit of it's not exactly a win now move because these guys are all 23, 24, 25, but it's certainly at least a medium term, if not short term move. It's not like hockey where you bring in a guy who's 47 years old to play on your third line, or like this guy, he brings a championship pedigree and he's going to kill penalties and Pat Maroon is going to, it's not that kind of hockey trade deadline signing. It's more long-term than that. These guys are all signed for 3-4 years now, but certainly they're thinking we're going to take these guys and these guys are going to drive them forward both now and in the next few years.
Somewhere Doug Risebrow's ears just perked up. You're like, third line center, tell me more.
Chris Simon is available?
Okay.
What? He skates in straight lines?
You said I've never heard of a number 8. Okay, explain.
Oh, sorry.
Explain for the casuals. I'm a little bit more of a casual sometimes. I know of a 9 and a 10. What are the numbers? What do the numbers mean, please?
I'm going to do my best, and somebody on the internet is going to tell me I'm wrong about all this.
That's the best part
because these numbers are they're hard to define. Number 9 is usually a striker. But a podcast is forever.
You can get aggregated like crazy. Aggregate this man. Okay.
So when you think about midfielders, you can have somebody who is mostly a defensive midfielder, mostly an attacking midfielder, or some way in between. Mostly a defensive midfielder, usually we call a number 6. Mostly an attacking midfielder, we usually call a number 10. Someone who's sort of in between often will be called a box-to-box midfielder in the sense that they'll defend in their own penalty area and get down to the other penalty area to play offense. Call that a number 8.
Okay.
In general, people will use those terms, and then people will start using Italian terms and Spanish. I'm not going to say trequartista. I'm not going to do it. We're not going to use that term.
And a number 9 is just a pure goal scorer. Striker.
Number 9 is just a pure striker.
Yeah. Is there a 7?
And you might ask yourself, why don't they have the rest of the numbers? And that's a question I can't answer.
There's no 7, is there?
There's no 7.
So just a 6, 8, 9, and 10.
Wait. We could invent that on the podcast. What if there was somebody who was mostly defensive but was a little bit offensive? We could say they're a 7.
A 7. A 7. Like
instead of a 6.
They're
more than a 6, but not quite an 8. They're a 7.
But as a striker, or as a withdrawn kind of.
We're gonna have to workshop this.
Like a Joel Eriksson Ek type.
And we
bring the hockey analogy back.
All right, we're going to call it a 14 for Joel Eriksson.
14.
He's a 14.
14 is someone who can
He's playing the Eriksson Ek role.
Good two-way player. Really good.
Not the Makaleli role. The Eriksson Ek role. 14.
Okay. They need a good 14 actually. Wow, could use a few more too. So what does this mean for the context of this season? I think you started to answer that question, but how fast are all these guys here already? How fast do they play? Like what's 9 games left? They're like right on the fringe in that last playoff spot, but anything can go like either way, depending on basically any of these matches along the way. What should we expect, do you think, from these guys for the rest of this season?
Yeah, especially for these 4 guys who have just come in, and less so for Anthony Markanich, who's sort of a backup left back. He was the one they traded for. They traded St. Louis for him.
Okay.
He obviously is in the middle of his season, so I think they could plug him in wherever. But the other guys, they're coming in from overseas, and so they've got this visa thing. The update of it is this morning. We're talking on a Monday. The update as of Monday morning was that the 3 guys who are already in, Kamesh, Diaz, and Yaboa, all are in training. They're all here. They have their visas. Pereira is still working on getting his visa. So he was in the middle of his season in Argentina. So he is going to have a shorter ramp to get onto the field, but the visa process is the visa process, and Minnesota's got a history with the visa process. And so we don't totally know what's going to happen there. We should, let's just feel good that the other 3 guys are already here and have their visas and go from there.
Sounds like they don't need a visa. They need an American Express. Right? Am I right, John?
I just like on Mike's behalf, I'd just like to apologize to all the daily delivery listeners.
I'm so sorry. I know what you mean. It's so, but the fact that they're here doesn't mean that they jump into the lineup right away necessarily, or does it? Like, what's the tempering of expectations? Because this probably is more of a move for kind of like the medium term, right, than it is either A, long-term vision, or B, hey, all these guys are just going to show up, start training, fit right in, and they're going to go on a playoff run.
Right. Again, when you look at this sort of mid-season break, I think that's a little bit helpful. It's been a little bit helpful in the sense that you've had these guys who came in at the start of last week that now have 2 weeks of training without any games in the middle. They played an inter-squad scrimmage on Saturday, but that's it. That they could potentially be ready to contribute. I don't think you're going to see 3 or 4 or even 2 of them necessarily in the starting lineup on Saturday against Seattle. But the way they use subs, and that there's 5 subs now, I think that a number of them could be contributors on Saturday. We'll find out more as the week goes on, as we see who is training and get the updates and where the sort of those health levels are at and where those fitness levels are at for the guys who weren't in the middle of their season when they arrived. But I don't think there's a reason that several of them couldn't contribute against Seattle. And then, they've got another week until San Jose. They don't have a midweek game in between Seattle and San Jose next week. So you're looking at 1 to 2 weeks where it seems pretty likely to me that you could look at those guys and start saying, all right, can they give you 30 minutes? Can they give you 45? Can they give you 60 minutes? What kind of contribution can they make? And, we're also not saying that all of these guys that they just signed will definitively get dropped into the starting lineup either. There's certainly there's competition in the way that there hasn't always been competition for new signings in Minnesota. So I think that will give them a little bit of luxury in that we're not talking about 2 months ago in June when everyone was in an international duty or hurt. They're pretty not injured right now. Taniolo O'Shea, their breakout star at striker, is hurt. He hurt his hamstring in the final Leagues Cup game, and so he'll probably have a week or 2 left on his recovery. But other than him, everybody's healthy. So they've got a chance to sort of restart their season for the final 9 games.
Like the 3rd or 4th restart. Because, they had the start of the year where they were couldn't lose, and some of it was, hey, new style, catching teams by surprise, just run. You had the new coach come in, you kind of got everything solidified, then things start to turn a little bit. You got guys gone for international play, you've got depth problems, can't win at all, and now they're just kind of like settled into this spot where you're right, kind of like right at that spot of the standings where you could go either way this year. So kind of an opportunity, I guess, to reinvent themselves, I guess, kind of on the fly. You just don't see this in, for people who don't follow, other, for people who don't follow MLS or other like soccer leagues, like the opportunity here to 3 or 4 weeks with no league matches, and then all of a sudden you're sitting here with a chance to like have a whole new kind of cast of characters. This doesn't happen in like the NFL or baseball. This just doesn't really happen.
Yeah, the only thing you could potentially even think of is if in baseball you had like 5 young guys who were all at AAA and you wanted to wait and manipulate their service time and call them up June 1st, and you got like an infusion of talent. That doesn't happen either. So it's mostly a theoretical possibility that you could remake a baseball team in the middle of the season, or David Festa and Zebby Matthews are amazing and they come up and they change your team because they give you more depth of pitch or something like that. That's a possibility, but again, that's theoretical. That's not something that happens very often. No. Minnesota, this is really their 3rd season. Like you said, they had the start of the season where everything was amazing. They got to June and everything fell apart because guys were gone, guys were hurt, the league was figuring them out, whatever it was, a combination of all of those factors. Things were terrible for 2 months. Now they've had a month off. Now they're restarting their season, and they've got 9 games to make the playoffs and see what they can do.
One more thing on this that I want to shift quickly to PWHL, not PWHL, the Aurora, not PWHL.
Women's soccer. I'm not going to put you on women's hockey. I'm not going to put you on the spot.
I'll
talk PWHL all day. Let's do it.
Cycling through my brain, like what am I talking about? Of course, Aurora. I want to get to that in a minute. The news of them not going for the pro league in 2026, but. So what do you think is going to happen? Should they, or what do you think they think should be the ceiling this year? Do they still fully expect to make the playoffs? Do you think that would be a boon at this point? How do we kind of break out the last 9 games?
They absolutely expect to make the playoffs. I think what Eric Ramsey, their manager, has said is, I think we've had our bad run now, our bad stretch now. Now, obviously, if they turn around and they lose 7 more straight games, that's, a different horse entirely.
It's more than a bad run. It's a bad team.
But their expectation is that they make the playoffs. I think you look at the top of the league, you look at the 2 LA teams are gone and over the horizon in terms of catching them. I think even Colorado, which is 8 points ahead of them, is currently in the last home playoff spot. That's a lot to ask to make up in 9 games. But you look at the rest of the Western Conference, you Vancouver and Houston and Seattle and Portland are the teams right above them. I don't think there's any reason they can't catch any of those teams. Right now they're in 9th place, which is the final playoff spot. There's a wild card game between 8 and 9 for the right to get into the playoffs, much like the NBA. I think a reasonable goal for them would be to not come down to the final day needing a win to make the playoffs like they have the last couple of years, and just be in the playoff picture in sort of that 5, 6, 7 range where they're going on the road, but they're in the playoffs.
Okay, so let's shift our attention to Aurora, because you wrote about that earlier this week. They basically not going to be going to that high-level pro league in 2026. At least doesn't mean that's never going to happen, but what, to your understanding, was the kind of the reason for them saying can't do it at this time?
I think the reason entirely was you look at how much a franchise costs now, and it grew beyond anybody's expectations. I think if you go back to like 2019, I think if you look at like getting an expansion team, then it would have been like $1 million. And Angel City FC, the team in LA, just sold for $200 million.
Yeah,
that's in 5 years.
Yeah.
So when they were thinking about starting Aurora and maybe we could do whatever. If you had said, well, will you want to go to the NWSL someday? It would have been like, well, yeah, I think we could scrape together the $20 million that it might cost in a couple of years once we get our feet under. Nobody knew that it was going to be, we're going to need a billionaire benefactor to even think about going to the NWSL. So I think from inside Aurora, they've focused on running the club really well. Obviously they haven't lost a regular season game yet. The playoff success is sort of a different horse, but they're going to keep trying to just run the club really well, try to be meaningful to the fans, and see what happens. They're not going to be an expansion team in 2026 for the NWSL, but in the future, maybe there's another professional league starting up in the USL, the USL Super League, they're calling it, that just started last weekend, I think. Okay. Is that a possibility? Maybe that's a possibility. Maybe that's not a possibility. We'll see. They're in the under the USL banner right now in the W League, which is pre-professional, as they always call it. It's sort of like the Northwoods League equivalent. But I think the metaphor that Andrea Yoke used, I talked to her. She's one of the co-founders of Aurora. She was talking about, it's like with kids and you tell them, listen, you got to do your homework because that will keep your options open. You do your homework, you work hard, you'll, even if you don't know what you want to do in the future, you'll have options to do what you want to do. You don't do things right, then your options are going to be closed off. So I think that's Aurora's plan right now. Keep doing what they're doing, keep doing the right things and taking care of fans and taking care of players and trying to do things the right way and hopefully never losing a regular season game for them and see what comes in the future.
Is there any kind of, 2-3 point explanation for how these franchise values have just soared? I mean, it's just typical stuff that happens when leagues take off and there's interest that they didn't necessarily know was going to be there.
Well, I'll go back to what we were talking about right before we started podcasting. We were talking about Minnesota United playing at 5:30 p.m. And you said, "Oh, that's the Caitlin Clark night for the Lynx."
Yep.
5 years ago, would we have said, "Oh, the Lynx are playing Saturday night"? I don't know if we would have,
right.
But we do now. Caitlin Clark coming to town. That's a huge story in a way that it wouldn't have been 5 years ago. You screwed up and talked about the PWHL.
I did.
PWHL. Yep. We wouldn't have been talking about the Minnesota Whitecaps 5 years ago. It's just this balloon has expanded from, I'm making a hand gesture, podcast listeners, so just stick with me here. It's expanded from this tiny little thing to this huge, massive balloon in terms of interest in women's sports. So I think you look at NWSL franchise values, it's the same thing of going from, people who are trying to teach and coach and sell insurance or whatever women's hockey players had to do 3 years ago to now being part of a big deal professional league. It's been this amazing, insane, massive growth. And I think the NWSL is part of that.
Awesome. Well, maybe someday Aurora will be part of that, or perhaps, like you said, they'll be part of this other league. For now, like you said, a very successful, well-run franchise in their own right. And the Loons, John.
Pat Royce is about to burst in and talk about the playoffs. He's going to start yelling about the playoffs right now. He's going to just burst through the door. You're in the podcast. You're in the Start Tribune podcast studio today. The door is about to fly open.
He is. He's going to complain about the playoff history. I know he is. I'll make sure to engage him on that next time.
Yes, absolutely. 100%.
All right, John. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
Good stuff from John. I like how our conversations usually veer into weird directions, and almost always I take him into a different sport because my knowledge base in soccer is okay, but it is very limited compared to a lot of other sports, a lot of other Minnesota teams. So I steer him into places that I know he's comfortable going to, like the Wild, to the number 14, the Joel Eriksson Ek position in soccer. Let's make that happen. Let's make that a thing this year. Who is Minnesota United's number 14? A two-way forward, a two-way center who can score but also plays a lot of defense. Who is that for the Loons? Good question. Someone should tackle that along with us, or maybe that player doesn't yet exist on their roster, but let's make that happen in soccer. And let's finish with the cooler. Mike Gundy, who's a man who's 40, talked to reporters about kind of the change in how things are going in college football, in sports, talking about the money involved and how he's tired of players coming to him and asking for more. Kind of, we're at this moratorium point where you can't renegotiate your NIL deal, you can't renegotiate how much you're getting. Talking to reporters, he says, the good news, the next 5 months, we can just play football. He said that last week, and he's of course, still the head coach of the Oklahoma State football team. He said, there's no negotiating now. The portal's over. All the negotiation is history. Now we're playing football. The business side of what we do now, we have to have those conversations with the players. Tell your agent to quit calling us and asking for more money. It's non-negotiable now. It'll start again in December. So now we're able to direct ourselves just in football, and that part is fun. I hadn't really thought about how these negotiations, how players wanting more, how the jockeying, even within a team, probably has an impact on how things go in the locker room, how teams are dealing with distractions, things like that. It is a whole new world in college sports, not just with this, with everything going on in college sports, but that comment from Gundy rang particularly true for me, and I thought that was particularly interesting. So I thought I would share that with you today at the end of the show. Should have some Lynx talk with Kent Youngblood on Wednesday's show. Big week for them. Las Vegas twice on the schedule, then the Caitlin Clark game on Saturday, second time they play the Indiana Fever at home this season, and that coincides with the Maya Moore jersey retirement game. That is Saturday at Target Center, so a huge week for the Lynx. So good stuff coming up there. Should have Josh Minot for a segment. Timberwolves player Josh Minot should be on at some point this week as well. Hoping to talk to him sometime today. So listen for that later this week as well. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.